Habituation is a simple type of learning in which repeated presentation of a stimulus elicits a weaker and weaker response, and the habituation technique is a method of discerning individuals' recognition of a stimulus by determining whether they show evidence of habituating to that stimulus. Memory develops steadily during infancy, and the habituation technique can be used to measure a baby's memory. And another way you can take advantage of it is the infant's interest in moving objects. And we can also use the habituation technique to discover what babies expect. A peculiarity of early childhood is that most adults can remember events that happened when they were 5 or 6 years old, but very few adults can recall any memories before that time. And this is a result of infantile amnesia, which is the relative inability of adults to recall events of their early childhood. This has generated a lot of interest in attempts to account for the phenomenon. A modern hypothesis of this is that we depend heavily on language to encode and retrieve memories, so infantile memories, if stored without verbal information, may be less accessible. Another mind-reading method can be applied to infants measures differences in heart rate associated with interest in an event. And in this, our parasympathetic nervous system is activated, and our heart rate slows when we are calmly interested in some event or object. The more interested the infant is in an image as measured by how long it takes to distract her, the more her heart accelerates. Memory is but one of many capacities of the mind, which we next consider cognitive development, which is the progressive increase in cognitive ability displayed by developing individuals, and this embraces development of reasoning and problem solving as well as language. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a problem in directing attention that is also accompanied by more physical activity and fidgeting. Something that can be used to treat ADHD is called methylphenidate, which is also called Ritalin, and it's a nervous system stimulant that is used to treat ADHD. Next, we have Piaget, who studied the stages of cognitive development. He was a Swiss psychologist who revolutionized the way science is regarded children and the process of mental development. He said that a child's mind is organized differently from an adult with its own specific logic. And his cognitive development theory embraces two key ideas. The first being that the child is an active participant who is engaged in adaptation. Adaptation is the process by which an individual learns about the world and incorporates that information into his or her mental life. Two processes that drive adaptation are assimilation, which is the process of taking in information about the external world, and accommodation, which is a change made in the mind as a result of taking in new information about the world. The idea that the growing child actively builds her own mind is sometimes known as constructivism. And the second key idea in his theory is that there are distinct stages of cognitive development that a child must go through to think like an adult, and the child must thoroughly accommodate one stage of thinking before they can properly assimilate into the next stage. One modern constructive take on this view is that children, even young children, are like scientists, proposing hypotheses about how the world works and then trying out various behaviors to test whether the hypothesis is correct or not. It's called the scientist in the crib. So now Piaget has 4 stages of cognitive development. The first stage is called the sensory motor stage, and it's the first stage in which individuals learn to use sensory and motor skills. And this happens in the first 2 years of life when we learn how to use the body's sensory and motor apparatus. About halfway through, we learn about permanence, which is the concept that objects continue to exist even if we no longer perceive them. Also, for Piaget, the principles learned at each stage of development reflected a cognitive structure inside the mind, which he called a schema. So now moving on to the second stage of his cognitive development, called the pre-operational stage. This is about from ages 2 to 7, and this is when children learn to use language to represent objects and actions. Um, they also show egocentrism, which is the notion that everyone knows what you know and everything revolves around them. It is likely they do not have a theory of mind, which is the understanding that other people's minds are different from their own and they may have different information. And you can test this using the Sally Ann test. This is when you tell a child that the doll Sally has a shiny new ball that she puts in her basket. When Sally goes outside to play, another doll, Anne, moves the ball out of the basket and puts it into a box. And at each stage of this test, you ask the child questions to make sure he understands what's happening. And then you say, Sally comes back inside and wants to get her ball. Where will she look for it? And a young child without a theory of mind will think that Sally knows what he knows and that she will look inside the box where Anne put the ball. And by the end of the pre-operational stage, the child sheds his egocentrism and develops a theory of mind. He will understand that of course Callie will expect the ball to be in the basket where she placed it. The next thing, despite having learned about objects' permanence during the sensory motor stage, children at the pre-operational stage still reason intuitively rather than logically. And this intuitive reasoning is most famously seen when testing children on the concept of conservation. And conservation is the physical laws that volume and mass of objects are conserved no matter how they might be arranged. Now moving on to the third stage of Piaget's cognitive development, the concrete operational stage, which is from about ages 7 to 11. And this is where children acquire formal logical skills but tend to be very concrete in their thinking. They also have trouble with abstract and theoretical questions, but they can learn how to do math like addition and subtraction. Now, the last stage of Piaget's cognitive development is the formal operational stage, and this starts at about age 11. And this is where children are able to consider many different theoretical possibilities for a condition so they can solve complex hypothetical problems using abstract ideas. In this stage, they're able to consider many different theoretical possibilities for a condition. So moving past Piaget's cognitive development stages, the proper emotional and social development requires a warm, interactive adult. So, of course, the mind does not operate slowly through logic. Emotional processes are at work too. So, temperament refers to a person's emotional makeup, the way he or she generally responds to a variety of situations. And it is considered a long-lasting aspect of personality and is usually thought of as inborn. This also refers to emotional responses that are seen in infants and seem to persist through life. One milestone in infant emotional development is the onset of stranger anxiety, which is the negative response to infants toward unfamiliar people. And the process of learning to recognize and follow the parent is called imprinting, which is clearly adaptive response.